Like every game in the series, Persona 5 is full of memorable characters that add life to the world and give you a reason to spend your limited resource of time with them. The types of stories told through these interactions vary in their importance and tone, but overall, they are some of the strongest aspects of this series and set it apart from other games in the genre. Yuuki Mishima's social link is no different. His journey from victim at the hands of the school's coach to the #1 Phantom Thieves stan and ally, while having to overcome childhood trauma on the road to self-acceptance, is very compelling, especially since the progress he makes along the way is bumpy and inconsistent. In a game about forcefully beating up bad guys to change their ways, Mishima shows that personal growth is possible within yourself if you're willing to put in the work to do it. It was to my surprise then that after completing Persona 5 Royal for the first time a few years ago, I discovered that opinions on Mishima are very mixed. While many do appreciate his story and character growth, many also see him as annoying, conniving, weak, and just an overall loser, all of which I believe are unfair criticisms. In this video, I want to break down Mishima's story in Persona 5 Royal to show how he is a well-written character that experiences real, meaningful growth and deserves just as much love as many of the other characters receive in Persona 5. We first meet Mishima during Kamoshida's arc at the beginning of the game, where he is simply referred to as well-behaved student, and his early characterization certainly reflects that moniker. He is shy, soft-spoken, and seems to mostly just be Kamoshida's errand boy, as he is often seen summoning other students to the coach's office. Visually, his face is covered in bruises and bandages, conveying to the player early on that he is clearly a victim of Kamoshida, highlighted by the volleyball scene where the coach is shown to be playing way too rough. As the investigation into Kamoshida unfolds, he is initially hesitant to help the player and Ryuji with evidence to incriminate the coach, leading to some friction between himself and the player. This initial introduction to Mishima's character sets him up nicely as a foil to the two earliest members of the Phantom Thieves, especially Ryuji. Whereas Ryuji was also a victim of Kamoshida, he is much more fired up to bring him down, especially when he gains access to the powers of his persona. Mishima, on the other hand, is much more timid and worried about retaliation from Kamoshida and the school's leaders, and thus doesn't initially contribute to the investigation. His reasoning is pretty sound, given that Kamoshida is well loved by the school leadership, whereas Ryuji is known to be a troublemaker. Without knowledge of personas or the metaverse, why would Mishima think anyone would listen to him and Ryuji over Kamoshida? However, after the incident with Shiho, he becomes much more willing to cooperate and even confronts Kamoshida with Ryuji and the player, giving us insight into his character and informing us that it was Kamoshida who instructed him to leak the details of Joker's criminal history. After the completion of Kamoshida's palace, Mishima is the first person to apologize to An for not standing up to the coach sooner, showing a completion of this initial story arc of his. It's clear he's had a decent deal of growth despite being a minor character, and it sets his character up well going forward. Now, it's not too hard to understand why some people might have gotten a bad first impression of Mishima, especially if you weren't paying close enough attention to him as a character. He may come off as whiny and cowardly, especially compared to a character like Ryuji, who is much less concerned with the consequences of his actions. While the Phantom Thieves forcefully changed the hearts of evil people in society, Mishima's life before the start of the game consisted of living with injustice to avoid retribution, both physical and social. To me though, that's not a cowardly act. It's important to remember that Mishima is a victim of a well-loved member of the school faculty. The power dynamics at play during this act of the game were heavily weighed against him, so his initial inaction is not only justified, but is really the only logical option he had. Yet, when the injustices became too much to bear, even he joined in to confront Kamoshida. And, as it would turn out, the growth he experienced through this arc would continue on through the main narrative, as well as through his social link. Before diving into his social link, I want to examine Mishima's Archana affiliation, as I believe it is integral to fully understanding his story and characterization. Like all social links in the game, he is associated with a card from the Tarot Suite. In this case, he is represented by the major Arcana card, the Moon. The Moon card represents fear, illusions, and intuition. It is associated with being attuned to the world around you and being able to pick up on subtleties without having to be explicitly told. It presents itself upright during a tarot reading when past experiences haunt your subconscious and disrupt you from moving forward with your life. When the Moon card is reversed, it indicates that the negative emotions associated with those past experiences are subsiding, allowing you to move on. It's telling you to start listening to your own voice and not the voice of others. If you're familiar with Mishima's story, you may already see the connections here. In the Persona franchise, characters associated with the Moon Arcana often have past experiences that negatively impact their personality or life choices, but through their interactions with the player, ultimately change for the better. For example, Nozomi from Persona 3 works through his feelings of inferiority he always felt regarding his deceased younger brother, and eventually realizes the religious cult he is in is not helping him move forward. Ai from Persona 4 is another Moon character who turned to materialism and self-obsession to hide the trauma she experienced due to bullying as a child, and eventually realizes she is only interested in those things to gain admiration from the kinds of people who caused her trauma in the first place. As we start to examine Mishima's story, I think it's clear that he represents both the ideals and the pitfalls of this Arcana, making it an important lens through which to view his development that we experience firsthand as his social link story progresses. Starting shortly after destroying Kamoshida's palace, we learn that Mishima has been quite busy. It turns out that he has created an entire fan site dedicated to the Phantom Thieves and has easily deduced that Yu, Ryuji, and On are the mysterious group he now idolizes. Intuition is a key aspect of the Moon Arcana, after all. He ends up taking his role as the moderator of this fan site very seriously though, as we see in his next social link scene that he is staying up all night fighting against who he calls haters. It's not entirely clear though whether he's putting all of this work in because he truly believes in the ideals of the Phantom Thieves, or whether he is enjoying having some degree of power after being powerless for so long. Ultimately, it's probably both, and depending on your pre-existing opinion of him, this scene could come off in one of two ways: pathetic or endearing. Personally, I found this scene more on the endearing end on my first playthrough, as he is clearly trying to help the group that helped him. But it certainly sets the groundwork for the darker side of his story going forward. We see the power of running the fan site quickly go to Mishima's head over the course of the next few social link scenes. From using it to get dates with girls to almost using crowdsourced money to eat at an expensive restaurant, it's clear his judgment is not entirely sound. And his motivations in running the fan site become even hazier. This is further backed up when we meet his childhood bullies and learn that the bullying he experienced still weighs heavily on him, and he seems desperate to prove to us and to himself that he is useful. Again, does he actually care about the mission of the Phantom Thieves, or does he just want to feel important? This question continues to be at the forefront during the next few social link scenes with Mishima. From wanting to change an actor's heart after finding out that actor is dating one of Mishima's favorite idols, to wanting to change a childhood bully's heart after hearing nefarious rumors about him, he begins to see himself as not one part of the Phantom Thief's success, but as the main driver of it. His delusions become so disruptive that the Phantom Thieves are forced to confront his shadow to determine whether it's necessary to change his heart forcefully. From this conversation, it's confirmed that his behavior stems from self-hatred. Before meeting the player in Ryuji, his life sucked and he didn't have any friends. But at least he always knew where he stood in life. He saw himself as a loser, so he behaved accordingly. However, after meeting the Phantom Thieves, he felt important and included in something larger than himself for the first time in his life, and just got too carried away. This self-hatred bubbles to the surface of his real-world self in our next conversation with him, where he admits he became too focused on gaining popularity for the Phantom Thieves and especially for himself. After some excessive self-pity, he commits to working through his selfish desires and self-doubt to do what he always wanted to do: help people. I find this change of heart one of the most emotionally impactful in the entire game, given that it didn't actually require a change of heart by the Phantom Thieves. Mishima recognized that he was no longer in this for the right reasons and wanted to return to the purpose he began the site in the first place, to help people facing injustice. The next time we see Mishima, he does just that. After getting a call from his childhood bully, he comes to discover that bully getting beat up by some criminals. Mishima ends up being able to defend him using his quick wits and the knowledge he gained from being a victim of bullying himself. Despite having no reason to defend someone who put him through so much, he still does. And not for acceptance or to fit in, but because he believes people facing injustice should be helped. His ideals of justice have clearly moved from being self-centered to being simply focused on helping people in need. The final scene of Mishima's social link is a reflection on the progress he's made throughout the game. His journey from a weak victim of Kamoshida's to a giddy fanboy to a delusional website moderator and finally, to someone who understands their limitations but will fight for justice regardless, is not the flashiest, saddest, or most complex social link in Persona 5, but in my opinion, it's one of the most impactful. If we think back to what the Moon Arcana represents, it's all here in his story. He begins the game traumatized by his childhood bullying and from Kamoshida, which affects his entire worldview going forward. Despite wanting to fight for justice with the Phantom Thieves, he can't let go of his desire for fame and popularity to prove to his bullies that he's not a loser. By the end of the game, his card is metaphorically reversed, showing how he's moved on from needing acceptance from the people who caused him pain. And he will now move forward motivated by his own desires and not ones imposed on him. In the end, like many characters in Persona 5, Mishima's story is one about self-acceptance. His path to self-acceptance might have been windier than others, but ultimately, I found his story to be one of the most impactful in the entire game. Video game audiences are often drawn to the brave, bold, and outspoken characters that fight for their beliefs wholeheartedly, because it's those characters they want to see themselves as. However, it's in characters like Mishima, characters that usually have more in common with most players, whom very real stories can be told through. In a game about forcefully changing the hearts of evil people in society, it's refreshing to befriend a character that changes his own heart when he recognizes the fault in his actions and mindset. And that is why I believe Mishima deserves more love and credit from Persona 5 fans. I'd love to hear your thoughts though. Did you like Mishima when you first played the game, and have your feelings changed over time? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you next time.